Yes, hello, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. We have a lot of people here. I'm Claude Bussac, the director of PHotoESPAña. First of all, thank you to Fundación Telefónica, who allows us to organize this cycle of conferences, as in previous years, with great artists, emerging photographers. During these gatherings, we reflect on the state of photography currently and in the future. This year, this cycle includes 2 sessions, one today with Edward Burtynsky. Thank you for coming. Tomorrow, an exhibition by him opens at Centro, and next week we have another session with Lua Ribeira. Thank you for following us via streaming, and I will now call Edward Burtynsky and Marta García Haro, who will be talking to him. Marta is a specialist in art and sustainability. She works at United Nations. She's a previous colleague from PHotoESPAña. So here, please come to the stage. Thank you to both of you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Welcome to this activity. Hello to everyone who is following via streaming. You will also be able to participate on this conversation. Claude, thank you for this opportunity. After so many years have gone by since we worked together, to be here and to enjoy this conversation with Edward Burtynsky. I'm here with a double role. On the one hand, United Nations. I work at an organization that is linked to United Nations that promotes global sustainable development. And in my previous life, I was a cultural manager. I coordinated exhibitions at PHotoESPAña for many years. And with this double role, from the point of view of art and sustainability, we will be having this conversation during the next hour. First of all, Edward will be presenting his most recent work, African Studies. You will be able to see it at Centro from the day after tomorrow onwards. It is focused on sub-Saharan landscapes. He has traveled around 9 countries from the continent. Even if he's very well known in photography, allow me that before I give him the floor, just a few more words on his career. Edward Burtynsky has been showing the impact of humans on the planet for more than 40 years with spectacular and moving images of industrial landscapes. Apart from working as a photographer, he's also co-directed a trilogy of documentaries, Manufactured Landscapes, Anthropocene, and Watermark. These 3 documentaries are still being shown in festivals nowadays, and hopefully we'll be able to see them in Madrid soon, because I haven't had that chance. His photographies are in more than 80 museums and collections around the world. Among other awards, he has received a TED Award, the Arles Gatherings Dissemination Award, another one that he received from the participation related to photography, and he is got more than 8 honoris causa PhDs. We will now be listening to his presentation with regard to his exhibition in PHotoESPAña. We will talking to him on his projects, on his career, and then we will have some time for a Q&A. So Edward, welcome to Madrid. Thank you for being here with us today. The floor is yours.
Hola, and thank you, Marta. It's a real pleasure to have an exhibition here again in Madrid, and I had an exhibition in 2006, so I just did the math, and it was 17 years ago that I had an exhibition, so it's been a while, but I always enjoy coming to Spain, and much of my work has taken me to Spain over the decades, and so I'm not a stranger to the landscape here and to doing aerial work here as well. Just a little brief on my background. So I come from Canada. My parents both were displaced by Germany during the Second World War, and they came to Canada and without speaking a word of English, and began their lives in 1950. Here, I was born 5 years later. My father was from the Carpathian Mountains. He lived in a mountain village, artisanal town where they did lots of crafts, and my father himself was involved in painting for ceramics, for backsplashes in kitchens, and so there was a creative world that my father had come from, and so he was very creative when I was growing up. He was also very interested in nature, so I got to see nature and be in the forest as a 3-year-old looking for mushrooms, and he was very Eastern European in his approach. And I think that appreciation for nature and being in Canada, where we are a small population with a vast landscape, with a very large country, and many places where I can go and see what nature intended, a place that exists before we changed it, before we cut the trees, before we put in highways, and before we put in buildings and roads. And so I think I didn't understand it at the time, but having that sense of what it is that nature intended for the land was an important deep understanding of deep time of cosmology, of that we are a planet, and that nature is this thing that has dominated the planet for a long time. And now I am born in a time, so when I was born there was 2.5 billion people in 1955, and today there was over 8 billion people. So in my own life I've seen a tripling of humanity. So something's going on now. We're in a population explosion, and I did understand that quite early in my career when I was in going to university in the late 70s, and I saw this hockey stick growth of the human population, and I was interested in photographing landscape with a large format camera. So if you go see my images at the exhibition, you'll see that the detail that I work with is very intense. So I worked with 4x5 in the early days camera with a hood over my head, and then I moved to an 8x10 negative. And this was a very slow process. It was a process that made me slow down and think about what it was, and to compose very, very carefully and thoughtfully, because at that time, one sheet of film would be like in today's it would be like 20 euros in today's dollar just for one sheet of film, and I would do 2 for every picture, so it was a big commitment. And so you wait. Sometimes I would spend 2-3 days and not take one photograph because the light wasn't right or things weren't just perfect. So again, it taught me that patience, and now I've moved to digital completely, but I'm still using the kind of learnings that I had from my early experiences with photography. And if I started to think about what it is that eventually I started to understand that I was photographing, is the human and march towards globalism, towards industry moving to other places, like especially from the West to China, because in China there was, and again in North America, it would be a lot of jobs going from Canada, United States to Mexico. So, if I looked at my kind of distilled idea of what is globalism, it is multinationals in search of a labor force that's inexpensive, low taxes, so the special economic zones that would be created by China or other countries, and lax environmental laws. And when all 3 things are present, you'll find the multinationals going there, and then they can start making running shoes or coffee makers or whatever much more cheaply than somebody who is making them with their labor laws and unions and higher standard of living. Then whoever's making those shoes or coffee makers in the West can't compete unless they go there. So I was very interested in not only how we extract resources, but how we deploy those resources and where we deploy them to make the things that we consume every day. So when in that thinking, I'd gone to China and I had gone to India and I'd looked at manufacturing, and then I started hearing about how China was now starting to export jobs, that their labor was starting to get too expensive, that people wanted more money, that the environmental laws were starting to get more difficult because of the amount of pollution that they were experiencing. And then the need to want to offshore this somewhere else. And they were starting to offshore to Bangladesh and Vietnam. But I was particularly interested in Africa. Africa, a continent with 54 countries, all with a variety of governance, many of them at varying levels of corruption. Some run fairly well, but most of them have issues. But in that, watching China starting to export, and then China actually announced over 5 years ago that they were going to export 75 million manufacturing jobs around the world to try and find these kinds of conditions. Again, low environmental regulations, cheap labor, and these special no tax zones. And so Ethiopia in particularly and Senegal started to open up their doors to Chinese manufacturing. So that was one of the interesting things that I wanted to focus on, but also the fact that Africa is really, if you look at in globalization, it is the last great continent that still has vast resources, largely because the infrastructure wasn't there. They didn't build the roads. They didn't have the trains to go into the interior. It was complicated. And without ports and without trains and without all of that infrastructure to bring these resources and to move them around the world, it wasn't going to occur. But China went in there with what's called a Belt and Road Initiative, started putting in ports, started putting in roads, bridges, trains, all of that. So I went to photograph that. I went to see what China was doing to try to get these resources. If we can bring the lights down just a little bit on this so that we can see the images. So I'm just going to take you through a few of the things that a very short kind of grouping of images. There's a bigger installation of the images at the Museum at Centro. But this image here, in Namibia, it's one of the most beautiful areas in all of Africa, the Red Desert. And I also went and looked at these fantastic landscapes that were still there. It's if you look at Africa on the globe, it's actually not. It's not correct. The way the globe works and the way it diminishes the scale of Africa. Africa is one of the largest continents, and I was always surprised at how long it took to get from one side to the other, or from one end to the other. It would be these vast, flights of 8-9 hours just to make it from north to south, and I just started realizing how vast a continent and how much is still there that hasn't been exploited. So I wanted to show some of the beauty of it. In the Rift Valley, again, sometimes the ideas I come up with, I saw a documentary on National Geographic on the Rift Valley, and they had some aerial photographs of it probably over 30 years ago. And I said, one day I want to go there. So when I got the opportunity, and I had a digital camera and a helicopter, I did the Rift Valley through northern Kenya, which was remarkable. And then this is an image from northern Ethiopia. currently, or it just actually a couple of years after I took this image, it ended up in conflict. There was a war going on up there, but at that time it was still safe to travel there. This is a caravan of camels that is taking salt out of the Danakil Basin, which is considered the hottest place in the world. It's 400 feet below sea level. All the light concentrates like a bowl. And when we were working there, it wasn't unusual to have 50, 51, 53 Celsius during the day and 40 to 45 Celsius at night. So it was one of the hottest shoots. Even the equipment wasn't working properly. Our drones to do the aerial work weren't working properly because we were 400 feet under the sea in terms of sea level. And so it didn't understand in the GPS how it could be positioning itself at 400 feet under sea. So we had to actually turn off all of our GPS coordinates and navigation systems. And then this is again in Namibia, in the interior. Oftentimes I'll find places through research, through Google Earth, or sometimes a pilot. In this case, a pilot said there is if you're interested in extraordinary landscapes, there's this area where it's about 65 million year old formation in the middle of the Namibia desert. And it takes about 2 hours to fly there and 2 hours to fly back in a Cessna. And the Cessnas have about a 5-hour duration that you can fly in. So we had 1 hour with the subject and 4 hours of flying to get there and back. And then, of course, when you're flying over 2 hours of desert, you're hoping that the plane stays in the air, because the chances of surviving if you land there and you're 2 hours by flight into a desert, trying to be found is probably not a very pleasant experience. I'm here, so we made it. Ethiopia, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, it's the largest dam, again, with a lot of Chinese investment being built in northern Ethiopia on the Nile River. Very controversial. Egypt was very upset about it because it's at a very important tributary to the Nile, and they thought if improperly managed, they can start losing water and quantities of water further down the Nile, where Egypt is dependent on that water. In fact, 3 months after, it took 2 years to get access to that dam, and it was a Polish engineer who finally let us in and was able to get the paperwork for the government to let us photograph it. And surprisingly, like in Addis Ababa, 3 months later, he was assassinated in the streets, and they assume it must have been an Egyptian hit, because he knew more about the building of that dam than any other individual on the project. And again, it was such a controversial building of that dam that they were trying to slow it down. It's now currently operational. Also, I wanted to show that Africa is very much like any other resource extraction country, with large multinationals, doing gold mining. This is in particular gold mining, and diamond mining, and a variety of other copper, iron ore mines. So I went and looked at all of the existing mines and operations that were at scale. This is a big mining operation, and it's interesting where I've developed a way of seeing through years and years of working, and I was always interested in the compression of space, and I was influenced by abstract expressionism in the past, and as a painting, as a flattening of space and all overness and no centrality to the images. So oftentimes I will work on these kinds of themes and bring it to industry, so that there is a kind of a blend of the real world with different approaches and techniques in the world of contemporary art. And I wanted to kind of marry these things. Even in the past, in more historic art, I would sometimes draw on compositional approaches to the work, so that oftentimes when you're looking at these images, and if you go see the show here, these are images of the real world. I don't use Photoshop. I use Photoshop as a printing technology for contrast, color, density, sharpness. So on those levels, but I don't use Photoshop as a compositional tool. I use it as I want to capture the real world and to make it feel like it's from another world, but these worlds are our world. And that's something that I wanted to always have with the viewer, is that you can't quite make out where is this and what is it, but when you get behind it, you realize this is industry, this is where our copper comes from for the motors in our cars and the windings in our phones to vibrate it. These are where all the things that we use every day come from, these kinds of places. This is a diamond mine in South Africa. And then this is also a lake where a lot of soda, it's a process where they need soda for metallurgy. And this was an area where it was evaporating in the edges of this lake. This is also artisanal mining in Madagascar. In the exhibition, you'll see a big mural of the same area in Madagascar where they're mining for sapphires. And it's handwork. They don't have any machinery, so they're just using shovels. And this is like a human conveyor system to be able to gather bags of this sand. And in that sand, there might be some kind of precious stone, in particular sapphires, and they would go and, like they pan for gold in the rivers, they would remove all the sand and look at all the pebbles and see if there's any precious stones, in the sand. So this is them gathering the raw bags of sand to see if there are any precious stones in those bags that are done later in the process. And then I started looking at China in Africa. So these are the factories that were now being run and operated by Chinese. The Chinese were the number one operators, and then India was also very present in these factories, bringing and setting up these factories to make T-shirts. This is a shoe factory. This is a shoe in Ethiopia, which is largely the exact same factory that you would find in China. In fact, in some cases, they would just dismantle these factories and take all the sewing machines and all the different machinery to make shoes off the floor and bring them to Ethiopia by ship and then by train, and then set up the factories there, and then bring in workers from the countryside to work for usually something like $1 or $1.50 US a day. They would be paid to work in these factories. And if you look in this factory, there's a spot right here. So 20 years earlier, there was people from the West, Caucasians, teaching the Chinese how to make shoes. And here there's a Chinese kind of boss who's teaching them how to make the shoes. So to me, that was a way to represent globalism and how it's shifted into the present. This is the Belt and Road Initiative. So again, if you see with the hats, the straw hats, those are two Chinese supervisors, and it's a complete Ethiopian crew building a road system, again, to bring trucks and to bring resources out of Ethiopia. This is just one of the most, some of the incredible landscapes I was able to experience. So the book is a mixture of real, pure landscapes with these man-altered landscapes and industries. So the book kind of continues. And then what I'm going to show you now is a 2-minute piece. So what I've done, with my partner and my wife and my partner in work, Julia, who's here, what we've done is she's helped produce a piece that oversees about 40 years of my work into a multimedia experience. It was originally a piece that was designed to go into the center square of the city in Toronto. It was like our Times Square. There are 22 digital screens. So you'll see some images of outdoor screens, digital screens. So that was the first performance of the piece. It's a 20-minute piece with sound and music that was scored for it. And then we were able to, during COVID, we had more time because we couldn't present it. So I then brought it as an indoor experience. So now we're taking that indoor experience, this 20-minute immersive piece, really looking at the human impact on the planet, looking at industries, but putting it to a powerful score and also trying to tell the story of my 40 years of work through this 20-minute piece. Okay, thank you.
Voy a cambiar al inglés para que la...
I am going to switch to English to be able to have a conversation in English with him.
Edward, I had some questions about the African studies, but well, I've got so many questions, but I'll start with one with the work you just shown us. It's very clear that there is kind of a threat over the African region because they have such resources. And I've read in many of your interviews, you're saying that you're not protesting or denouncing a certain situation, you're just showing what's happening. But still, I am sure that showing those fields of extraction or certain environmental damages may not be appreciated by governments or companies. So I was wondering if you found any resistance when doing your work, or did you risk anything when traveling over those regions?
There are areas,
Yes.
like when probably the most dangerous place where I photographed, it was in Nigeria and the Niger Delta, where the oil is being extracted, and there is a large illegal contingent of people, like natives of the area, have lost everything, and the pollution is insane in terms of the amount of oil that's spilling into the delta. It was considered one of the greatest delta. It is the largest delta in all of continental Africa, and it was the home of some of the greatest megafauna, elephants and rhinos. There are none. They're all gone. And there's a fight for survival for those who lived in the towns and villages of that delta because it's been so polluted. So now they've taken to stealing from Shell and from other companies and doing what's called bunkering, illegal bunkering. So we were literally flying in what was a war zone, and Caucasian or anybody who looks like with the oil company is enemy number one. And in fact, there was at that time, and you could still get kidnapping insurance. So you pay an insurance so that, and it's a whole process so that if you get kidnapped, because they would kidnap pilots, particularly where the pilots or the hotels were, they said, do not walk outside, because they said literally there could be somebody in the bushes waiting for you. But that was a very dangerous place, and then they would take a pilot and then ask for $250,000 US, and then you get the pilot back. And the company usually lets you get away with that once, and then the second time, then you don't get hired there again. But you have to be very, very careful. So that was probably one of the most dangerous, Lagos and Niger Delta. I didn't feel that kind of danger elsewhere. And in terms of access, a lot of my work has moved to aerial, which in a way, if I want to show a mine or a large human extraction, area where we're taking out iron ore or copper or diamonds or whatever, the actual aerial view perspective is in a way more revealing of scale than even when you're on the ground looking at it. So there's some cases I didn't have to, ask permission because they don't own airspace. You have to let them know you're there because of their blasting, and they'll say, "Don't be there between this and this in time because we're going to be detonating a big area, and you don't want to be above that when you're flying." So you'd have to let them know, but they can't stop you from flying. But on the places that we asked that we wanted to go in, they usually let us in. And the idea is, I certainly understand that there's environmental degradation, but what I'm trying to say that I'm not showing this may be a disaster, but this is not disaster aesthetics. This is business as usual. This is what we're doing for all the to get the things that we need to build our cars and our planes and our trains and our homes and to put in all our appliances and all of that. This is all resources that are taken. So this is these are the scales of operations it takes to supply 8 billion people in all pursuing a Western style lifestyle.
Yeah.
So it's more. So I like to say the work is revelatory, but not accusatory.
Yeah.
This is business as usual.
Yes, let me deep into that, because actually related to that aerial view, the way you photograph now from the air or from elevated spaces gives us an amazing view of how devastating humans can be, but also it can be amazingly beautiful. And thanks to your photographs, we also see places that are not accessible or invisible, and that actually provide our standards of living, as you're saying. We need all this to live the way we live. So of all these places, which ones have astonished you the most or impressed you the most?
Well, I mean, if I look at over my career of 40 years, I mean, the places that have shocked me, like the shipbreaking in Bangladesh, was something that I didn't even think was possible in this day and age. It was like stepping back in time and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and looking at the satanic mills that Dickens spoke about, where life was cheap. The average age of the young men who worked there were 17 years before they die. The pollution was unbelievable. Well, when I walked those yards in Bangladesh, it was very much breaking the biggest oil tankers on the planet, the biggest things that we've ever built. And again, I would say the thing that surprised me in Africa was what happened to the Niger Delta, this beautiful delta that's been completely despoiled, and and you could just, everywhere you looked, there was just oil seeping out of the landscape into the water. It couldn't contain fish, it couldn't contain animals, and humans could barely live there at that time. And when you see the scale of it, it was very sad and very frightening. Another thing that we did in the film, and we brought a lot of attention to it in the film Anthropocene, the Human Epoch, that I did with Jennifer Bechwal and Nick Depensier, my co-directors. But we showed the burning of the elephant tusks, so as a way to show kind of unnecessary extinction, because it was humans who poachers would go and look for the biggest bull elephant with the biggest tusks and shoot that elephant, which was there's usually one male and many females in an elephant herd, and they would shoot the male for the tusks, and then they were called super tuskers. I think there's less than 20 of them left in all of Africa. But there were 11 piles of the tusks of 10,000 elephants, and one of them was just the big super tusker, and they burned them all one night as a signal to would-be poachers, and that this won't be tolerated, and this was a symbolic destruction of, I think it was almost 200 million, market value of tusks in one night, just to send. So that was heartbreaking to think of because elephants are sentient beings. They feel, they remember, and so it's you think of the trauma to those herds that you see in those piles is hard to kind of comprehend.
Yeah, and now sustainability is the center of everything. So there are many artists talking about the climate emergency and other issues, but I would like to go back to your beginnings and share with the audience how come you started to be interested about this topic, but I'm more interested in knowing what keeps you motivated now as well.
Well, I mean, when I started doing, I think it was in the early 90s, I had this kind of moment, it was like a eureka moment where I realized that, everything, it was a moment I was doing work on tailings in Northern Ontario, showing where all the effluent, all of the byproduct of mining would go into these ponds, and they would be multicolored. They were fascinating places because there was still a lot of mineral that would be oxidizing in these places. But as I was pulling out, it was a fresh blacktop road, and I was in a Volvo, and I just put oil in the car and gas in the car, and I had a rain jacket because it was raining and it was plastic, and I realized that everything, the black top, the plastic raincoat, the plastic steering wheel, even like looking at my windshield saying that was probably fossil fuels to melt the glass. And I just realized that everything in my surrounding environment when I left that gas station was somehow connected to oil. And yet I didn't know where oil came from. I didn't see the places. So that's when I decided to do an oil project. And it was, again, in the mid-90s, they were just starting to talk about the fact that loading CO2 in the atmosphere was going to change the climate. It'd been around for a time before that, but nobody was listening, but it was starting to happen. And then when I started looking at the scale and thinking about the scale, at that time, we were burning 90 million barrels of oil a day. But if you added the natural gas that we were also burning and the coal that we were burning per day, and if you converted all of that, and this is in the mid-90s, it was 220 million barrels of oil per day. And so you start to comprehend, this. A professor at Duke's University once made a calculation, and he said, if we burnt everything that photosynthesis, every forest, every prairie, everything that's burnable on the planet, the amount of oil we're burning per year, and the amount of exhaust going, CO2, would be like burning the whole planet to the ground 26 times a year. So it kind of occurred to me that we can't get away with burning the planet down 26 times a year over year. There's going to be a consequence, and we're beginning to see that consequence now.
Mm-hmm. And you have received many awards, especially for your outreach work. And I actually knew you as the photographer of the Anthropocene. So while you show all this predatory world through the images, you produce really beautiful images that can be, I see them as a cartography of the landscape or even an abstract painting. So you kind of addressed it before, but what kind of impact do you hope to have with your work on people's awareness or consciousness about the environment?
Well, I think that, as someone who's made it a kind of a life trajectory to bring these worlds into our urban world, so that there's really no real reasons for anybody to go to these places. Like if you went back 250 years in time into a town or a city, the materials that built that city were probably within a cart ride, because there was no motors, no oil or gas or anything like that. It was human power and horsepower. So whatever human and horsepower can bring into that town, that's what that town was built out of, and most of the things that town was consuming was within the region of that town as well. So, whereas we live now in a globalized world where we don't know where anything comes from. Like, I have no idea where the sand for that glass came from. I don't even know if that water came from there. It could come from somewhere else. It could be Evian water from France. Who knows? I don't know. So we don't know where anything comes from anymore, where our clothes come. So this, I think the work that I was doing was to try to reconnect us into these vast worlds that are the almost forgotten ages of man, like the Stone Age and the Iron Age and the Copper Age, and all of these are still alive and well at vast scales, that we're still using stone and copper and iron and all these other things. So I wanted to kind of reconnect us with these worlds so that we understand that we are, doing, with technology, able to work at a scale that was unimaginable 200 years ago. So I think the work is in service of that, of bringing those worlds forward and bringing them into our consciousness. And using aesthetic allows us to kind of engage. And more I'm now kind of putting deeper texts with the images so that people can first be engaged with the piece. And I think until you're engaging, and whether it's through aesthetics or whether it's through composition, color, texture, all these things that kind of invite us, they're like archetypes that bring us in, invite us, come look. And then you start to unpack what it is. And I think it's a way to kind of communicate the fact that what is going on in the world. And I think, in many ways, what I hope to see happen is that, I'm always encouraged when somebody says, I saw your film or I saw your images, and, I was going to be going into, finance, but I decided to go into environmental studies, and I'm going to, see if I can change it. So I'm always encouraged that somehow these things do affect people, and it's kind of hopeful that as you bring these worlds forward, it brings people a greater consciousness about the consequence of what 8 billion people and our lifestyle has on nature, because in all of the work, what I think it shows is that nature is the victim here, that it's being pushed back, and being diminished. So biodiversity is being shrunk and shrunk and shrunk as we expand and expand. So there's a direct, consequence to our expansion.
Yeah, let's shift also to another subject that I know that worries you or keeps you thinking, which is the subject right now. Artificial intelligence. Well, in Spain, as in the rest of the world, the debate about AI is in everyone's lips, and with the arrival of tools that are allowing us to generate unlimited content, we feel there is a change coming with unknown consequences. It will speed up many tasks, but there will be also many losses in jobs, with the threat of the spread of fake news, etc. How have you explored this technology yet? Where do you see the biggest risk, or do you see it more as an opportunity?
Well, I think it is definitely is going to be an opportunity for some, and I think it's also going to force, whatever your field in. If you're in the field of computer programming, you either start to use those tools or become obsolete, because there's going to be adopters of those tools. It's the same thing as globalism, in a way. If somebody's making those running shoes over on a special economic zone in China with cheap labor, you either go there and compete. So if you're Nike, who did go there first, and then if you're Adidas, you better go there or you're out of business. Well, it's the same adoption problem here. So if you may not want to adopt, like you might be a legal firm and say, we don't want to use it, we don't want it to, write our things, or you can be, writing articles or doing news, blogs or something like that, where you're helping. If you're not using it and you're just using human labor, those who are going to use, ChatGPT or whatever to help them get the work out faster with less human cost. If you don't adapt, then you don't get to survive as a business. So I think these things force everybody to go down. Even like I don't think Google Google was caught unaware. I don't think Google was expecting to let out Bard, but it was the fact that OpenAI, let out ChatGPT. All of a sudden, it was an existential threat from Microsoft to Google, and they're going, we can't let this happen. And then now it's a full-on battle of supremacy of who has the better AI. I think there's a real danger. I think it's probably I don't think anybody understands yet exactly what it means. I know in the world of photography, back when I was saying that when I was photographing with an 8x10 camera, it wasn't for the faint of heart to go into and learn how to use all that and to commit the resources to shoot like that. And now with iPhones and everybody could take a picture. So the technology has been literally lifted. So now we live in a world where everybody takes pictures, and there's one might say that the addition of images to the world, what it was 30 years ago to what it is today, it's a fire hose. Well, now you don't ever have to actually take a picture. You don't have to take a course. You don't have to know how the camera works. You just go to ChatGPT or Midjourney and you key in some prompts, and all of a sudden these images that are harvesting from all the work that photographers have done over the centuries and decades, and it just harvests all that and then recompiles it without attribution, and voila, And my question becomes: anybody who can type in some prompts but has never taken a photograph, like as a serious artist ever in their life, never taken an art course, or never was even interested in being an artist, all of a sudden, are they an artist because it looks like an artist did it? Because it looks like it. Is it? Because it'll, somebody not knowing where it came from, and it's looking pretty good now. Wait for a year. Wait for 2 years. Wait for 5 years. It's only getting better. And the danger from the experts out there, the danger is that it's very quickly going to get a lot smarter than us. And in nature, like Geoffrey Hinton, who is considered the godfather of AI, from Toronto, by the way, and was hired by Google, but he said in nature, generally speaking, anything that has intellectual supremacy always prevails. So we built something that's going to be, more intelligent than us. It will prevail. What does that mean? Will it be nice to us, or will it not be nice to us?
Yeah, we could. This debate could go on and on. I've been talking with many friends about this, especially with artists who feel logically very threatened by
writers, filmmakers, musicians.
But even our
poets,
work, we were talking about lawyers. There's so
all
many.
the white collar jobs now. It's going right after white collar jobs.
Well, I think I should stop here and open the floor to questions from the audience, because probably many people also want to make a question. Podéis levantar la mano y antes de hablar que os pasen el micrófono.
You can raise your hand and please use the mic to ask the question.
Speak in English.
Okay.
So, thank you very much for the talk, Edward. It was really interesting, and I'm definitely going to see the exhibition at the weekend. We've been speaking about what you hope your work has in terms of influence and effect on people. But in terms of yourself, what has been the biggest change you felt in your own consumption or your own ideals from your own impact on yourself? How have you changed your habits based on what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, having seen what I've done, like even like for instance, to get here, there's unless I want to go on a boat like Greta and take a few weeks to get here, I got on a jet. But what I do, whenever I do that, I'm offsetting. So I'll always, I've found very reliable, they call it gold standard offsets for things that I can't change, but in my own life, like I'm sure many of you, I mean, I'm born Eastern European, heritage, and so, it's a meat and potato kind of culture. So, I was raised, so it's harder for me to walk away from proteins, but I've walked away from red meats, like maybe a specialty occasion I'll have. But then looking at my own kind of studio, what things I can't kind of recycle or I go into offsetting. So every year we do offsets, and then in my own, I have a place where I like, because as part of my work, I have since 1985, I've had a place in the country 2 hours north, near nature. And for me, doing all the work that I do, having that natural escape, reminding me of what it is that I'm trying to, bring out or point out in my work, that it's nature, and to recenter after you've seen things like, things in India or things in Bangladesh. It's hard. It's hard to look at the scale of the trauma that's happening to both people and the landscape, and so to keep kind of positive in my work, I've had a place in the country, and recently, I bought electric cars, so now I have an electric car that I have enough solar panels up there that I can recharge my electric car. I'm starting to growing a small garden and learning about that. So just really trying to figure out, I'm trying to think that if, in a way, if everybody was doing what I was doing, we would go back into an envelope. There would be a way in which we would start to reverse the damages if everybody started to think and act in these ways. And there are frustrating things like going to a grocery store and everything's in plastic containers, and I don't have an option, and so I think I also go out there, and when I have a chance to speak and be on stage with corporate leaders, I say there's a role for corporations, and to simplify their role, I think the corporations, particularly if they're providing products, they need to do all the things that they can do to make their products more sustainable, to make it easier for us to make those choices. We all live in very complex, busy lives. If you've got kids, jobs, getting to work, traffic, to go in there and, I forgot my own personal containers because for the berries that I'd have to then, it's not practical. So these packaging has to be considered. And so you want those companies to find ways in which there's either a virtuous recycling and a system that's actually working and actually recycling all those products properly, or ways that we can use those packaging and then it can be composted and put back into growing food or whatever. So there is a lot of work to be done in the world of design and creating a world that's more sustainable, that I believe it's individuals, corporations, and of course governments have the ability to set the standard, or to set the regulation for everybody to have to conform to, and those are very important too. I mean, in Canada, we just introduced a carbon tax, so we're, I think there's about a $40 per barrel, carbon tax expected to go up to 150 over the next 5 to 10 years. So that's, those kinds of policies can quickly disincentivize the use of oil-driven cars and gas-driven cars, and move to electrical cars and building electrical grids and things of that nature. So I think there's a role for all individuals, government, and corporations that can move it quickly. And I think when the right incentives are put in place, so it makes more economic sense to do something that's greener and more sustainable than it is to do it the dirty way and the less sustainable way. When the economic incentives are aligned properly, things move very rapidly. But if oil companies and coal companies are allowed to set the agenda, they can keep wind and solar and all those pushed back, because they won't allow the incentives to go to those greener, but they'll take them for themselves, but make sure their lobby groups don't allow it to enter into other competitive and alternative forms of energy. So there's, again, things that can be done that can move things rapidly in a capitalist system, which is the one that we have. It's just, everybody pulling in that direction.
Thank you. ¿Alguna pregunta? Por allí también.
Any more questions? There's one over there, I think. If we have another one, we can have two questions.
Hi, thank you very much. I wanted to ask you, where are you taking your work? What's the next step for you?
I'm trying to move to a more hopeful kind of position. It's challenging at times, especially when you start hearing what's happening with AI, but and other things, and the speed at which climate change is happening. Like right now, there are more, I think, forest fires, in Canada right now than has been recorded in a long time, and it's going to get worse. It's dry. There's a big, like a heat dome over all of Canada right now, but I'm starting to look at, trying to find. I recently did a project where there's a large. It's called Mountain Pass, but it's a large rare earth mining operation, and we need rare earths to create motors and all of the kinetics in electrification. So motors and things like that need rare earths. So I went and so I've been to lithium mines. So I'm looking at like mining for the future, like what to electrify our world. What needs to happen? Batteries, motors. We still have cars, and but in that electrification, where do we have to go? We have to find lithium, cobalt, more copper. So I am kind of thinking about, what is, because technology, I can't see a way out. We all can't go back to the land. We all can't start to hunt and fish and grow our vegetables on land. With 8 billion people, we're urban. So technology is definitely a key component that got us into this, and it's going to be the key component that can help us out of this. So I'm kind of now interested in the technology and the resources that are going to help us get out of this.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much. They're telling me we don't have more time for questions.
Here,
Okay.
because we're a bit over time.
Okay.
Thank you for your time
My pleasure.
tonight. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you a very successful exhibition in Madrid.
Yes, I'm very excited to see it. I haven't seen it yet. I just landed this afternoon, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ah, claro.